Stop. What happens when a scorned man tries to humiliate his ex-wife at the most public event of the year? Prepare for an unexpected, spectacular twist. Hey everyone, before we dive into this epic tale of betrayal and ultimate transformation, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video if you love stories of empowerment and satisfying poetic justice. You won't want to miss what happens next. The Night of the Phoenix. A billionaire's public humiliation. In the glittering heart of London, at the most exclusive charity gala of the year, Rupert Sterling believed he had it all. A stunning young woman on his arm and his boring ex-wife Eleanor, firmly relegated to the past. He swaggered through the crystal ballroom of the Victoria and Albert Museum, expecting to be the envy of every guest. But Rupert made one crucial mistake. He never imagined that the woman he discarded would rise from the ashes of their marriage, not as a victim, but as a phoenix. Get ready for a story of betrayal, stylish vengeance, and a transformation so astonishing it left the entire city's elite speechless. This is the night Eleanor came back to claim her name, and Rupert learned the true cost of arrogance. The Victoria and Albert Museum's dome ballroom was a galaxy unto itself, a dazzling universe where money and power orbited in a dizzying, glittering dance. Crystal chandeliers, like frozen waterfalls, spilled light onto London's elite. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume, and even more expensive ambition, hummed with the murmur of conversations that could launch companies or end careers. Tonight was the annual Children of Tomorrow Foundation Gala, the undisputed apex of the social calendar. An event where being seen was as crucial as breathing, and no one understood that better than Rupert Sterling. Rupert, with his impeccably styled salt and pepper hair and his custom-made Savile Row tuxedo, surveyed the room with the proprietary air of a king inspecting his court. His hand rested possessively on the small of a much younger woman's back. She was Chloe Ashton. The press called her his companion. Rupert preferred to think of her as his upgrade. With her fire engine red dress clinging to a surgically perfect figure and her loud, slightly too bright laugh, Chloe was a living trophy. She was everything his ex-wife Eleanor was not. "Isn't this divine, Rupe?" Chloe cooed, squeezing his arm while eyeing a prominent politician across the room. "Absolutely everyone is here. They always are," Rupert replied, his tone tinged with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been denied anything. He sipped his champagne, his eyes scanning, evaluating, cataloging. He was networking even in the stillness. Every handshake was an investment, every smile a transaction. This gala wasn't just a party, it was a hunting ground. His gaze fell upon Lord Harrington, a potential investor for his latest venture capital fund. "Excuse me for a moment, darling," he murmured to Chloe, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Work calls," Chloe pouted prettily. "Don't be long, I feel so naked without you." Rupert's smile was thin. "You're never naked, sweetheart. Not with that necklace on." He gestured to the cascade of diamonds circling her neck, a piece that had once been a Sterling family heirloom, and which he had explicitly demanded Eleanor return during their bitter divorce. Seeing it on Chloe brought him a small, private victory that still gave him a flicker of satisfaction. As he moved through the crowd, a human shark parting the waters, he couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph. Life was good, better than good. He had shed 15 years of a boring, predictable marriage and had re-emerged leaner, sharper, reborn. Eleanor, with her quiet intelligence, her classic but understated style, her preference for a library over the spotlight, had become an anchor. He was a thoroughbred, he reasoned, and he had been shackled to a mule. He recalled their last argument before the final separation. He had called her dull. "You're just dull, Eleanor," he'd said, the words slipping out with a casual cruelty he had perfected over the years. "You have no spark, no ambition. Look at you. You're content just to exist." He had expected tears, or a fight, something. Instead, She had looked at him with an unnerving, light-eyed serenity. "You're right, Rupert," she had said softly. "I am content to exist. I'm just no longer content to exist with you." The memory still stung, not with guilt, but with irritation. It was her lack of a dramatic reaction that bothered him. It was as if she had left him long before he walked out the door. Their divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. He had been generous, of course, or at least his lawyers had framed it that way. He gave her the suburban house and a comfortable alimony. What more could she want? She was nearly 40, a ghost in the social world she had never truly embraced. Her life, he imagined, had shrunk, collapsing into a quiet, beige existence of book clubs and gardening. The thought was vaguely comforting. "Rupert, good to see you." Lord Harrington greeted him with a cordial slap on the shoulder. Harrington was old money, a man whose respect Rupert craved. "Harrington, you look well. The market must agree with you." They exchanged the practiced courtesies of their class, their conversation a carefully choreographed dance of subtle boasting and probing questions. Rupert was in his element. He was charming, witty, dropping the right names, laughing at the right jokes. Chloe rejoined him, clinging to his arm, playing her part as the beautiful, adoring accessory. "And this must be the lovely Chloe," Harrington said, his eyes giving her a quick, almost imperceptible glance. "So lovely to finally meet you," Chloe gushed. "I've heard so much about you. Rupe always talks about your incredible business acumen." Rupert inwardly winced at the Rupe. It sounded so juvenile. Eleanor had always called him Rupert. "Well, you've certainly bagged a good one," Harrington said, turning back to Rupert, a hint of something unreadable in his expression. "Though I must say, I always had a soft spot for Eleanor. A woman of true class, that one. How is she doing?" The question was a minefield. Rupert forced a dismissive smile. "Eleanor? Oh, she's fine, doing well. You know, happy with the simple life." He made a vague gesture with his hand, as if describing a small, uninteresting creature. "I doubt this sort of thing is her cup of tea anymore." "A shame," Harrington said, his gaze drifting toward the grand entrance of the ballroom. "She had one of the sharpest minds I ever encountered. Her ideas on the museum board were invaluable." Rupert felt a familiar flash of resentment. People had always said that about Eleanor. They had praised her intelligence, her grace, her quiet dignity. He had seen it as a reflection of himself, a testament to his good taste. But over time, it had started to feel like a competition he was losing. She had a light of her own, and he had wanted to be the only sun in her universe. "Well, she's focused on other things now," he said dismissively, eager to change the subject. "Now about that new technology fund." But Harrington wasn't listening. His attention, along with that of several others nearby, was fixed on the massive, alarmed doors of the ballroom. A silence was beginning to fall, a wave of quiet that spread from the entrance as heads started to turn. Rupert followed their gaze, annoyed by the interruption. The arrival of a latecomer, no matter how important, rarely caused this kind of stir. A politician, perhaps? A visiting royal? The crowd near the entrance slowly parted like the Red Sea, and through the gap, a figure emerged. For a moment, Rupert's brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. It was a woman, but that was too simple a word. It was a vision, a spectacle of impossible elegance, gliding into the room. She wore a midnight blue gown, a sweep of deep blue silk that seemed to drink the light. It was cut with a daring simplicity that screamed haute couture, clinging to curves he didn't know existed, and sweeping out to her feet like liquid shadow. A single, dazzling diamond necklace, far more spectacular than the one Chloe wore, rested on her collarbone. Her hair, which she used to wear in a sensible shoulder-length cut, was swept up into a complex yet natural-looking chignon, revealing the elegant line of her neck. But it was her face that made the air leave Rupert's lungs. The face was familiar, but the expression was not. The quiet, almost timid woman he had divorced was gone. In her place was a woman of supreme, unshakable confidence. Her makeup was subtle yet transformative, emphasizing high cheekbones he had forgotten she possessed, and eyes that now seemed to hold a universe of secrets, and she was smiling. Not the kind, acquiescent smile he remembered, but a small, knowing smile. The smile of a woman who knew her own worth. Chloe, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, whispered, "Who is that? She looks like a film star." Rupert couldn't answer. He couldn't breathe. His champagne glass felt impossibly heavy in his suddenly nerveless hand. The room, with its hundreds of powerful guests, its cascades of crystal chandeliers, and its hum of importance, seemed to fade into the background. There was only the woman in the midnight blue gown, because he knew who she was. As she took another step into the room, a collective gasp seemed to follow her. People were not just looking. They were openly staring. Whispers erupted, spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. "Is that... God, it can't be. Eleanor Sterling?" And as the name, her name, echoed in the stunned silence, Rupert Sterling felt an icy chill run down his spine. This was not the simple ex-wife he had relegated to the suburbs of his memory. This was a stranger, a goddess, a reckoning. This was Eleanor, and she had just returned to his life. Do you think Rupert deserved this level of shock? Have you ever felt like Eleanor before her transformation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Eleanor felt the weight of their gazes, like a physical touch, 1,000 invisible hands grazing her skin. 6 months ago, it would have sent her running for the nearest exit, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Tonight, she welcomed it, absorbing it. It was fuel. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind for weeks, playing it over and over until the fear had worn down into a hard, smooth stone of resolution in her stomach. The walk from the car to the ballroom entrance had been the longest of her life. Her hands, covered by long silk gloves, had trembled slightly as she gave her name at the entrance. The woman's eyes had widened in recognition, the first small tremor of the earthquake she was about to cause. Now, standing on the precipice of her old life, she paused. A deliberate, calculated hesitation. She let them look. She let them drink in the transformation. The Eleanor they remembered was a woman who had perfected the art of going unnoticed, of blending into the wallpaper of her own life. She had worn muted colors, sensible heels, and an expression of polite reserve. She had been Mrs. Rupert Sterling, a role, not a person. The woman standing before them now was a masterpiece of defiance. The midnight blue gown, a bespoke creation by a bold young designer named Marco Valenti, was a statement. It was daring, elegant, and undeniably sensual. The slit running up the side, invisible when she was still, flashed a tantalizing glimpse of a toned leg when she moved. The diamond necklace, the cascade of starlight, was a loan from a high-end jeweler, a friend of a friend. It was not a family heirloom passed down by a man. It was a temporary crown she had chosen for herself. Her transformation was more than just clothes and jewels. It was in her posture, the straightness of her spine, the confidence in her shoulders. It was in the tilt of her head, the calm, encompassing gaze with which she surveyed the room. The months since the divorce had been a period of intense, painful, and ultimately liberating reconstruction. She had hired a personal trainer, not to please a man, but to feel strong in her own body. She had worked with a stylist not to fit in, but to discover what made her feel beautiful. She had spent hours in therapy, excavating the woman she had buried under 15 years of Rupert's casual slights and subtle put-downs. She saw him then, across the sea of frozen faces. He stood next to the redhead, the one she'd seen in paparazzi photos. The woman looked like a cheap imitation of the glamour Eleanor now effortlessly radiated. But it was Rupert's face she focused on. The jaw-dropping shock, the flicker of disbelief battling the cold, hard fury in his eyes, was more satisfying than she had dared to imagine. A slow smile touched Eleanor's lips, a genuine one this time. She took her first step into the room, and the spell broke. Whispers erupted into a roar. "Eleanor Sterling, I don't believe it. What has she done? She looks incredible. Rupert must be choking on his champagne. The last comment came from Beatrice Ford, the city's top gossip columnist, her eyes sparkling with professional delight. This was no longer just a social event. It was a story. Eleanor glided through the crowd, a serene smile fixed on her face. People she had known for years approached her with a newfound deference. Women who had once pitied her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and envy. Men who had barely noticed her before now stumbled over themselves to catch her eye. "Eleanor, darling, you look utterly breathtaking," exclaimed a woman whose name escaped her. "Thank you, Penelope," Eleanor said, her voice soft and even. She had made an effort to remember the names of those who had been kind to her and intentionally forget those who had followed Rupert's lead in slighting her. She was heading toward the bar when a man stepped into her path, blocking her. He was tall, with a ruggedly handsome face that stood out among the soft, pampered men of Rupert's circle. He had intelligent dark eyes that held a hint of amusement. "I apologize for being so direct," he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. "But I must say, your entrance was the most captivating thing I've seen all year. My name is Julian Vance." Eleanor recognized the name instantly. Julian Vance was a self-made tech billionaire, reputed to be brilliant, reclusive, and utterly disinterested in the city's social games. He rarely attended these events. "Eleanor Sterling," she replied, extending her gloved hand. He took it, his grip warm and firm. He didn't bow over it in the flamboyant European style some men affected. He simply held it for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "It is Sterling now then, not Mrs. Sterling?" "Sterling," she confirmed, a spark of pleasure running through her at the simple affirmation. "And please, call me Eleanor." "Eleanor," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "It suits you much better than the whispers I've been hearing." "And what whispers would those be, Mr. Vance? That you were a ghost?" He smiled. "It appears the reports of your demise were greatly exaggerated." His smile was warm and genuine, and for the first time that night, Eleanor felt truly relaxed. Across the room, Rupert watched this exchange with a mounting sense of fury. Who the hell was this man talking to his Eleanor? "She's not yours anymore," a nasty little voice reminded him. But the possessive instinct was deeply ingrained. He saw the way the man looked at her, the way she smiled back. It was an easy, intimate kind of rapport that he and Eleanor hadn't shared in years. "Rupe, who is she talking to?" Chloe's voice was shrill, cutting through his red haze. "And why is everyone still looking at her? It's just your drab ex-wife in a new dress." "Shut up, Chloe," Rupert snapped, his voice a low hiss. Chloe recoiled, her eyes welling up. "Don't you talk to me like that!" But Rupert was no longer paying her attention. He was watching Eleanor and Julian Vance. He watched Julian laugh, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to draw Eleanor in. He watched Julian gesture toward the bar and offer her his arm, and he watched Eleanor take it, her gloved fingers resting on his forearm as they walked away together, the center of their own universe, right through the middle of the crowded room. The sight was a physical blow. He had created this narrative in his head, a story where he was the victor, the one who had escaped a boring life for a brighter, more exciting one. Eleanor was supposed to be the tragic figure, the forgotten wife, fading into obscurity. But the woman in the midnight blue gown was not tragic. She was triumphant. And her triumph, he realized with a sickening jolt, was his humiliation. "Rupert, I can't believe that's her," Lord Harrington said, reappearing at his side. He wasn't looking at Rupert. His eyes were fixed on Eleanor. "Good heavens, she's magnificent." The word hung in the air between them, a judgment and a verdict. Magnificent was the last word in the world Rupert Sterling wanted to hear used to describe the woman he had discarded. The gala, which had started as his victory lap, was fast becoming his personal hell. And the night, he suspected, was far from over. The conversation with Julian Vance was like a glass of cool water after a decade in the desert. He didn't talk about the past, didn't ask probing questions, didn't treat her like a spectacle. He talked about art, a recent trip to Kyoto, and the ridiculousness of canapés. He was funny, self-deprecating, and he listened, truly listened, when she spoke. "So what's your story, Eleanor Sterling?" he asked as they found a quieter corner near the terrace, away from the main hubbub. "And I don't mean the one everyone in this room is writing in their heads." Eleanor took a sip of the champagne he had procured for her. It tasted like victory. "I'm a woman who decided to read a different book," she said simply. Julian's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I like that. Most people here keep rereading the same page. So, are you an editor? A publisher?" "No," she smiled. "Just a connoisseur of new chapters." Confidence felt strange and exhilarating on her tongue. 6 months ago, she would have mumbled something about being a mother and a former board member. Tonight, she was the main character. "Do you think Rupert will learn his lesson? Or is he too arrogant to change? Tell us your opinion in the comments and don't forget to like the video." Their easy laughter and palpable chemistry didn't go unnoticed. Beatrice Ford was scribbling furiously in her notebook. Chloe was shooting daggers from across the room, her face a mask of furious disbelief. But the most intense gaze came from Rupert. He watched them with a laser-like, burning focus, his knuckles white as he gripped his glass. He couldn't stand it. He had to reassert control. He had to put her back in her place. Apologizing to a now sobbing Chloe, he stormed across the ballroom, his path clearing before him as people sensed the impending confrontation. He reached Eleanor and Julian, just as Julian was recounting a disastrous sailing trip. "Eleanor," Rupert said, his voice tight. He deliberately ignored Julian as if he were furniture. "I need to speak with you." Eleanor turned to him slowly, her expression one of polite inquiry, as if addressing a stranger who had asked her for directions. "Rupert, I'm sorry. I'm in the middle of a conversation." The dismissal, so cool and public, stunned him. "This will only take a moment. It's important." "I'm sure it is," she replied, her voice still irritatingly calm. "But as you can see, I'm occupied." Then she turned her back to him, a gesture so definitive and dismissive, it was like a slap. She smiled brilliantly at Julian. "Were you saying something about a seagull and your hat, Julian?" Julian, to his credit, picked up the thread of his story without missing a beat, though his eyes danced with amusement. The message was clear. Rupert Sterling had no power here. The humiliation burned in Rupert's gut, hot and sour. He was used to being the center of attention, the one who commanded respect. To be so casually dismissed by her in front of a man like Julian Vance was intolerable. He stood there for a moment, reeling, before retreating in a swirl of fury. His retreat took him directly into the path of an enraged Chloe. "What was that?" she hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "She just turned her back on you. Are you going to let her get away with that? And who is that man she's with?" "It doesn't matter who he is," Rupert snarled, gripping her arm too tightly. "It's a pathetic attempt to make me jealous. It's so transparent." "Jealous?" Chloe let out a shrill, ugly laugh. "She's making you look like a fool, Rupe. Everyone is talking about it. They're laughing at you. At us." The accusation struck a nerve. "Don't be ridiculous. No one laughs at me." But as he looked around, he saw she was right. The whispers hadn't ceased. They had changed tone. The shock had given way to amusement, to a malicious satisfaction that was palpable. He saw smirks on the faces of his rivals, pitying looks from his allies. He, Rupert Sterling, master of his universe, had become the laughingstock of his own coronation. The root of it all, he knew, was Eleanor. This whole fiasco was her fault. This calculated theatrical display was designed with one purpose, to humiliate him. He thought back to their marriage, to the countless times he had made her feel small, insignificant. He had seen it as necessary, a way to maintain the natural order of things. He was the star. She was the supporting cast. He recalled one specific incident about 2 years before the divorce. He had been up for a major promotion, a seat on the executive board. The final decision came down to him and one other colleague. The CEO, a man named Sir Michael Thorne, had hosted a dinner for the finalists. Eleanor had been seated next to Thorne, and, in her quiet way, had charmed him. They had discussed modern art, a passion of Thorne's that Rupert had always found tedious. The next day, Thorne had called Rupert. "Your wife is a remarkable woman, Rupert," he had said. "Incredibly sharp. Her ideas on the new gallery acquisitions were fascinating. You're a lucky man." Rupert had gotten this promotion, but the praise for Eleanor had soured the victory. It felt like he had won at her expense. That night, he had been cruel to her. "Don't think that little performance last night meant anything," he had snapped. Thorne was just being polite. "Stick to what you're good at. Planning menus and looking pretty. Leave the thinking to me." She had flinched, her eyes clouding with a pain that, at the time, he had found strangely satisfying. He had put her back in her place, now watching her across the room, radiating a confidence that seemed to eclipse the light of the chandeliers. He realized how wrong he had been. He hadn't been putting her in her place. He had been trying to extinguish her light because he was afraid it would overshadow his own. His simmering rage needed an outlet, and Chloe was the nearest target. "This is your fault," he hissed, turning to her. "That ridiculous dress. You look like a Christmas ornament." "My fault?" Chloe shrieked, her voice drawing more unwanted attention. "You're the one whose ex-wife just showed up looking like a goddess, and you're blaming my dress." She gestured wildly toward Eleanor. "Go do something. Don't just stand there and let her win." "It's not a competition," he insisted, though he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that it absolutely was. And he was losing. Meanwhile, Eleanor was making discoveries. Julian Vance. It turned out he was on the board of the Children of Tomorrow Foundation. He was a major donor, but usually sent a proxy to the gala. "What made you decide to come in person this year?" Eleanor asked. Julian's gaze was direct. "I heard a rumor the foundation was about to get a new, very dynamic board member. I was curious to meet her." He paused, a smile playing on his lips. "I may have had a small hand in your nomination," he admitted. "I was on the committee. When your name came up, I remembered Lord Harrington mentioning you. I did a little digging. A woman who helped turn around the City Museum's finances with her fundraising strategies, who speaks 3 languages, and who has a degree in art history from the Sorbonne. You weren't just qualified, Eleanor. You were a secret weapon they didn't even know they had." The validation was so profound, so unexpected, that Eleanor felt a sting behind her eyes. She blinked fiercely. She would not cry. Not tonight. "Rupert never mentioned my work with the museum," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I'm beginning to suspect," Julian said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "that there is a great deal about you that Rupert Sterling never appreciated." The warmth in his eyes was a balm on a wound she hadn't realized was still so raw. It was in that moment she knew her transformation was complete. It wasn't about the dress or the necklace or the stairs. It was about this, being seen, truly seen, for who she was. The night was just beginning. The main event, the charity auction, was about to start. And Eleanor had a feeling the real bidding hadn't even started yet. The climax of the gala was the charity auction, a high-stakes spectacle where fortune was flaunted and egos were tested, all under the guise of philanthropy. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man with a sharp smile, took the stage, and a hush fell over the room. Rupert, who had always dominated these events with his aggressive, almost brutal style, felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was his stage. Here he could reclaim his power. The first items: a week in a Tuscan villa, a set of vintage wines, sold for predictable astronomical sums. Rupert made sure to win one particularly coveted item, a private dinner with a famous chef, bidding far more than it was worth, just to show he could. He shot a triumphant look at Eleanor, but she wasn't even looking at him. She was in a quiet, intense conversation with Julian Vance, both occasionally glancing at the auction catalog. Then, the final, premier item was announced. It was a stunning, abstract painting by a celebrated contemporary artist, a piece that had been the talk of the art world. "We will begin the bidding for the Risen Phoenix at £100,000. the auctioneer announced. A paddle went up immediately. Julian Vance's. 200,000, he said, his voice calm and clear. Rupert's head snapped toward him. He hadn't expected Vance to be interested. Rupert saw himself as a patron of the arts. Vance was a tech guy, all circuits and code. Another bidder raised the price, then another. The bidding climbed quickly, a rapid exchange among a handful of the city's wealthiest collectors. Rupert stayed silent, watching, waiting for his moment to strike. He would let them tire themselves out. Then he would sweep in at the end and take the prize. It was his signature move. The bidding reached £450,000, and the room grew silent. It seemed stalled between two determined bidders. £450,000 going once, the auctioneer began. Rupert raised his paddle. £500,000, he declared, his voice ringing through the ballroom. A ripple of appreciation went through the crowd. This was the Rupert Sterling they knew. One of the other bidders dropped out. The other hesitated, then shook his head. £500,000, going once, going twice. The auctioneer looked at Julian, who hadn't moved since his initial bid. Julian simply smiled and shook his head slightly. Victory flooded Rupert. He had won. He had demonstrated his dominance. He looked at Eleanor, a smug, victorious smile on his face, and then a new paddle went up. A paddle held by a hand gloved in midnight blue silk. £600,000, Eleanor said, her voice not loud, but carrying an authority that cut through the silence like a diamond. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. All eyes spun from Rupert to Eleanor and back again. This was no longer an auction. It was a duel. Rupert was stunned. What was she doing? She couldn't afford it. Her alimony was generous, but not enough to buy a major artwork on a whim. This was a farce, a bluff. She was trying to drive up the price to make him pay more. Rage, pure and unadulterated, washed over him. He would not be fooled. He raised his paddle again, his hand shaking slightly. £700,000. Eleanor didn't even blink. £800,000. Chloe was tugging at his sleeve, her eyes wide with panic. "Rupe, stop! What are you doing?" she whispered frantically. "It's just a painting." He shrugged her off. It was never just a painting. It was about pride, power, putting Eleanor back in the place he had assigned her. £1,000,000, Rupert snarled, tossing the number out like a gauntlet. The room erupted in gasps. £1,000,000 for a painting at a charity auction was almost unheard of. It was a reckless, ego-driven move, and he knew it, but he couldn't stop. He looked at Eleanor, daring her to continue. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear, but something else he couldn't read. He looked at Julian, who gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. She lowered her paddle. "The gentleman has made his point," she said, her voice tinged with a cool amusement that was more exasperating than any anger. She turned to Julian. "It appears he wanted it more than I did." Rupert had won. He had the painting. But when the auctioneer hammered down the gavel and announced him as the winner, the victory felt hollow, metallic in his mouth. He had just spent £1,000,000 on a painting he didn't even particularly like, all to win a battle she had started. The applause felt faint, mocking. He had shown his strength, but he had also shown his weakness. He had shown the entire world how much his ex-wife could still affect him. Later, as people mingled before the final speeches, Rupert cornered her near the terrace. The fury that had been simmering all night was ready to erupt. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice low and threatening. "That was a childish, pathetic game, Eleanor. You knew you couldn't afford that painting. You did it just to make me look like a fool." Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a glimpse of the fire that had been hidden for so long. "You are mistaken, Rupert," she said, her voice cold as ice. "I was not trying to make you look like a fool. You do a perfectly adequate job of that all by yourself. I was simply revealing your character to the room." "My character?" he scoffed. "Yes. A man so insecure he would rather spend £1,000,000 than be seen losing to his ex-wife. A man so obsessed with control he cannot bear to see me breathe the same air as him, without attempting to assert his dominance. She took a step closer, and he was startled by the intensity of her gaze. "You didn't see me as a wife, Rupert. You saw me as a possession, and you cannot stand the fact that your possession has learned to walk away." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing his pride, his ego, his carefully constructed self-image. "And as for affording it," she continued, a small, triumphant smile touching her lips, "it seems you've forgotten the inheritance my grandmother left me, the one I never touched because you told me we didn't need it, that you would provide for us. It appears my simple little life had some secrets you weren't privy to." She paused, letting the information sink in. "Oh, and by the way, the artist, Jean-Paul Dubois, is an old friend from my Sorbonne days. He donated the painting on the condition that I was the one to present it. The bidding war was just a small piece of performance art. All proceeds go to the children, of course. Your £1,000,000 will do a great deal of good." Rupert felt the blood drain from his face. He had been thoroughly, masterfully played. He was not the victor. He was the mark. She hadn't been bidding against him for the painting. She had been using him to drive up the price, for a cause she championed with a painting donated by her friend. "You!" he stammered, speechless with rage and humiliation. "I," she said softly. She looked past him, her eyes finding Julian, who was watching them from a distance with a look of deep admiration. "Now, if you'll excuse me, the Foundation's new board member has a speech to give." She turned and walked away, leaving him there, his £1,000,000 victory feeling like a fool's cap on his head. He was Rupert Sterling. He never lost. But as he watched Eleanor step onto the stage to a thunderous ovation, he knew with a cold, hard certainty that he had just lost something far more valuable than money. He had lost the war. The stage lights seemed to possess a consciousness of their own, seeking out Eleanor and bathing her in a warm, impossibly golden glow. In the spotlight, the midnight blue of her dress intensified to the color of an unfathomable ocean, and the cascade of starlight at her throat fractured the light into 1,000 tiny, brilliant rainbows that danced across her skin. She didn't just look regal, she looked anointed. Serene, powerful, and utterly in command, she was the still point in the whirling world of the crystal ballroom. The applause that greeted her was not the polite, obligatory clap for a donor's address. It was a roar, a genuine electric wave of enthusiasm from a room that knew it was witnessing something seismic. It was the sound of a verdict. Rupert stood motionless in the middle of the glittering crowd, a ghost at a feast he himself had meticulously planned. The champagne in his glass had grown warm, its bubbles dead. Chloe, a blur of harsh red in his peripheral vision, had long since peeled away from his side. He saw her melting into a group of women who were now giving him looks that were a poisonous cocktail of pity and morbid curiosity. He was an island, one that was rapidly eroding, and the tide of public opinion was receding, exposing the ugly, rocky bed of his folly. He had never felt so alone in a crowded room of people he knew. "Good evening," Eleanor began. Her voice, amplified by the microphone, lost none of its intimate warmth. It resonated through the vast hall, a calm, clear tone that effortlessly captured the attention of everyone present. "For 15 years I attended this gala on the arm of a powerful man. I wore beautiful dresses, smiled at the right people, and signed checks. I believe that was the extent of my capacity to contribute. I was a passenger in my own life." Her eyes, calm and deliberate, swept the room, and for a fleeting, electrifying moment, they met Rupert's. There was no malice in her gaze, no boastful triumph he could have braced himself against. There was only a kind of sad, piercing clarity, the look of someone who saw him exactly as he was and found him wanting. It was a look that stripped him bare. "It is easy to become a passenger," her voice continued, drawing them in. "In fact, it is the most comfortable thing in the world. It is safe. You let someone else drive, hold the map, choose the destination. You forget the power of your own feet, the strength of your own voice. You forget you even have a choice. But one day, the car stops. You find yourself standing at the side of the road, alone, with the dust settling around you, and in that silence, you have a choice. You can wait for another car to come along and hope it is going in your direction, or you can start walking. A murmur of profound understanding swept through the audience. This was language that transcended wealth and status. It spoke to the wife whose husband made all the decisions, to the man whose career was dictated by his father, to the artist who had given up their dreams for a steady paycheck. Every single person in that room, in some corner of their heart, understood the metaphor of the abandoned passenger. "I started walking," Eleanor said, a new strength infusing her words. "And I discovered something wonderful. I discovered that my own feet were stronger than I ever imagined. That my own voice, once I decided to use it, could speak volumes. I discovered that the destination I chose for myself was far more beautiful, more vibrant, more real than any place I had been led. And most importantly," her gaze then drifted, effortlessly finding Julian Vance among the crowd. He was leaning against a marble pillar, arms crossed, with a look of deep respect and admiration on his face. He gave her a small, encouraging smile that was just for her. "I discovered I was not walking alone. Tonight, this foundation, which is so dear to my heart, has raised a record amount of money," she announced, her voice soaring with infectious pride. "And it is in no small part thanks to the extraordinary, if somewhat spirited, generosity of Mr. Rupert Sterling." A wave of laughter, light, genuine and cathartic, filled the room. It wasn't entirely mocking. It was too grateful for that. It was the laughter of people who had witnessed a master storyteller deliver the perfect, satisfying punchline. Rupert felt his face burn, a heat that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She was thanking him, yet it was the most devastatingly elegant condemnation he had ever received. With a few perfectly chosen words, she had framed his ego-driven folly, not as a moment of weakness, but as a calculated act of philanthropy that she had orchestrated. She was using the wreckage of his pride as the foundation for her triumph. His £1 million contribution for the risen phoenix, a rather appropriate name, I think, she added with the slightest hint of a smile, will allow us to launch a project we have been dreaming of for years. It will fully fund the construction of a brand new, state-of-the-art wing for the Children's Hospital. The applause was thunderous now, a testament to the magnitude of the donation. Rupert felt a surge of nausea, so intense he had to grab the back of a nearby chair to steady himself. His name, his money, his public act of dominance, it had all been hijacked. "And so," Eleanor concluded, her voice ringing with finality, "I am delighted and deeply honored to announce that the new wing will be named the Sterling Vance Wing. Checkmate." It was a move so brilliant, so complete in its strategic cruelty, that a part of him could only admire it in stunned silence. He felt the eyes of hundreds of people upon him, expecting him to look pleased, proud. He was trapped. His name, their name, would now be forever linked to a building that would be a permanent brick-and-mortar monument to his public humiliation at her hands. She had not only defeated him, she had erased his narrative, co-opting his very name, the symbol of his power, and turning it into a symbol of her victory and his folly. She ended her speech with an eloquent, moving plea for continued support, but Rupert heard none of it. He was lost in the deafening silence of his own defeat. When she finished, the room rose to its feet in a thunderous, sustained ovation. It was not for Mrs. Rupert Sterling, the quiet, decorative wife. It was for Eleanor Sterling, the phoenix, who had not only risen from the ashes, but had used the fire meant to consume her to forge herself anew. As she stepped down from the stage, she was immediately enveloped by a crowd of well-wishers. Lord Harrington was among the first to reach her, his face beaming. "Eleanor," he said, grasping both her hands. "That was masterful, simply masterful. Your mother always said you had a spine of steel. She'd be incredibly proud tonight." Julian Vance waited for her at the edge of the adoring crowd. He didn't need to push his way through. He simply waited, a quiet, steady presence. When she finally broke free, he said nothing. He simply offered her his arm, a silent gesture of companionship that was more potent than any word of praise. She took it without hesitation, and together they walked toward the grand doors of the museum, away from the noise and the lights, toward the cool, quiet promise of the night air. Rupert finally moved his limbs, feeling heavy, disconnected. He stumbled out of the ballroom in a near trance. He didn't bother to look for Chloe. He knew what he would find: cold calculation. The trophy had seen the champion fall, and her loyalty, always a transactional commodity, dissolved with his perceived power. Hers was a contract, and he had just irrevocably breached its core clause: invincibility. He staggered out to the valet area. The cool night air was a shock, cutting through the overheated fog of the ballroom and his own personal hell. And then he saw them. Eleanor and Julian were standing by a sleek black car, its engine softly purring. Julian was holding the door for her, his posture one of easy, secure grace. Before she got in, she turned, as if sensing his presence across the expanse of polished concrete and luxury cars. Their eyes met. In that moment, he searched her face for any sign of the old battle. Anger, hatred, resentment, even a flicker of satisfaction. He found none of it. He saw something far more devastating: a serene, settled indifference. It was the look of a person for whom he was no longer a main character, or even a villain. He had been relegated to a footnote in a story that was no longer about him. The story of Rupert and Eleanor was over. This was the first page of the story of Eleanor. She gave him one last small nod. It was not a gesture of forgiveness or truce. It was a gesture of farewell, final, absolute, and complete. Then she slipped into the car, a queen leaving a conquered battlefield. Her victory was not only absolute, but effortless. As the car drove away, its red taillights disappearing into the glittering, indifferent labyrinth of the city, Rupert Sterling finally understood everything. He hadn't just lost a wife. He hadn't just lost £1 million. He had lost the best part of himself, the part he had never bothered to know. He had traded a rare, flawless diamond for a shiny piece of glass, and he hadn't even realized his own poverty until he saw the diamond sparkling in the light of another man. He stood alone in this dark, with the hollow echo of applause for a triumph that was not his, and the bitter metallic taste of a £1 million mistake. The king was alone in his gilded cage, and for the first time, with a clarity that shattered him, he realized the door had been open all along. He had just been too blind, too arrogant, too in love with the reflection in the bars to ever think of walking out. And that is how a woman who was discarded as simple and dull showed an entire city that the most dazzling transformations come not from a new dress or a new man, but from the quiet, unshakable discovery of one's own worth. Eleanor Sterling's story is not just about revenge. It is about reclamation. It is about taking back the pen and writing your own story in your own words, on your own terms. She didn't just win the night. She took back her life, and in doing so, she created a legend. What did you think of Eleanor's epic comeback? Was Rupert a villain or just a fool who wasted his greatest treasure? Let us know in the comments. And if you loved this story of empowerment, drama, and the sweetest, most satisfying karma, be sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to remember their own power, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what we have for you next.